The story of Emperor Taizu and the rise of the Song dynasty begins in a time of deep fragmentation when the vast and ancient land of China found itself divided among competing kingdoms. In the 10th century of the Common Era, the grandeur of the Tang dynasty had faded, and the empire that once unified much of East Asia had splintered into smaller, often warring states. This was the period known as the Five Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms, a turbulent chapter when regional warlords ruled through shifting alliances, fragile power, and frequent betrayal. Yet, from within this landscape of uncertainty, one man emerged whose vision and determination would give rise to one of China's longest-lasting dynasties. His name was Zhao Guangyin, known to history as Emperor Taizu of Song. As we drift gently into this narrative, imagine China in the mid-10th century. Rivers winding through fertile plains, bustling markets filled with the sounds of traders, and armies stationed along the frontiers of small states, each aspiring to dominate the fractured realm. Life for ordinary people was marked by both continuity and disruption. They tilled fields, carried water, and raised families much as their ancestors had done. Yet the uncertainty of warlords and shifting rulers cast long shadows across villages and cities. Into this world stepped Zhao Guangyin, a military man whose rise to power would be as remarkable as it was fateful. Taizu's journey begins not as an emperor, but as a skilled commander under the later Zhou dynasty, one of the five that rose and fell in quick succession after the Tang. Born in 927 in the region of Henan, Zhao Guangyin grew up during a time when loyalty to a ruler could shift with a single battle, and when personal merit on the battlefield mattered as much as inherited rank. His early years were spent honing martial skills and cultivating alliances within the military world, a path that would carry him steadily upward. His charisma, intelligence, and ability to command loyalty from his soldiers made him stand out in a period when such traits were rare and invaluable. The rise of Taizu is inseparable from the story of the Chenqiao Mutiny, a fateful turning point in the year 960. Zhao Guangyin, then a respected general, was called upon to lead troops against the threat of invasion. Yet, at Chenqiao, his men, weary of constant upheaval and inspired by his leadership, urged him to take the throne himself. The yellow robe, the symbol of imperial authority, was placed upon his shoulders, and with it the mandate to restore stability to the fractured land. Unlike many usurpers, Zhao Guangyin did not seize power through bloodshed, but rather accepted the loyalty and persuasion of his army. Thus, in a moment that blended ceremony with inevitability, the Song dynasty was born. The story of the Song is not merely one of conquests and rulers. It is also a story of transformation, of how China evolved into a society celebrated for its scholarship, art, and innovation. Under Taizu and his successors, the emphasis shifted from a purely militarized order to one that valued civil governance. Scholars, through a system of rigorous examinations, rose to positions of influence, while military power was deliberately restrained to prevent the kinds of upheavals that had plagued earlier eras. The Song would become known not for territorial expansion or martial dominance, but for cultural flourishing, scientific advances, and economic prosperity. Yet, the rise of the dynasty was not without its challenges. The Song emperors inherited borders that were contested and fragile. Nomadic powers to the north, particularly the Khitan Liao dynasty, posed enduring threats. Diplomacy, tribute, and compromise often defined foreign relations, reflecting a recognition that survival depended as much on negotiation as on force. In this balance of power, Taizu's legacy is defined by pragmatism, an emperor who understood that unity and stability within the empire mattered more than glory on the battlefield. As we follow the course of his reign, and the centuries that followed, we will pause often to glimpse the textures of daily life. For the people of the Song dynasty, life was lived among wooden houses with tiled roofs, along streets alive with the rhythm of commerce, and within temples where incense curled upward in quiet devotion. Paper money first circulated under the Song, trade networks expanded, and innovations such as movable-type printing began to shape intellectual life. It was an age in which beauty and knowledge were cherished, and in which a sense of refinement permeated the culture. But at its foundation lies the story of Emperor Taizu, the man who steadied a nation in disarray and gave it new direction. His reign from 960 to 976 laid the framework for what would endure as one of China's most influential dynasties, lasting over 3 centuries. Though his rule was relatively short, the principles he established, favoring civil authority, strengthening the bureaucracy, and building a culture of governance through scholars, would echo long after his death. In this journey, we will move step by step, tracing the origins of Zhao Kuangyin's rise, the formation of the Song dynasty, and the remarkable transformations that followed. Along the way, we will explore not only the political shifts, but also the quieter dimensions, the relationships within the imperial court, the role of family, the lives of scholars, and the subtle threads of betrayal, loyalty, and love that shaped the dynasty's early years. So as we begin, let us set aside the noise of the present world. Picture instead the vast landscapes of medieval China, the rolling plains, the fortified cities, the winding rivers that carried both trade and stories. Listen to the voices of history carried softly through time, and allow the narrative of Emperor Taizu and the Song dynasty's rise to unfold like a gentle river, steady and continuous. For in understanding his life and his legacy, we begin to grasp not only the making of a dynasty, but also the resilience of a civilization that prized wisdom, stability, and cultural flourishing above all else. To understand the rise of Emperor Taizu of Song, we must first step gently into the world of his childhood, into the years before power and the burdens of empire found him. Zhao Kuangyin, who would later ascend to the throne as Emperor Taizu, was born in the year 927 during the later Tang dynasty, in a region known as Luoyang in present-day Henan province. His family background was not of the exalted nobility, yet it was one of respectability and martial tradition. His father, Zhao Hongyin, was a military officer who served loyally in an age when dynasties changed frequently, and loyalty itself was a tenuous commodity. His mother, Lady Du, was known for her strength of character and her ability to keep the household steady through times of uncertainty. In Zhao Kuangyin's early years, China was far from unified. The collapse of the Tang dynasty in 907 had given way to a chaotic half-century known as the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms period. Northern China was ruled by a succession of short-lived dynasties, while southern China was fragmented into numerous regional states. This environment of instability left its mark on the boy who would one day be emperor. From a young age, he observed how power shifted not through legitimacy alone, but through the discipline of armies, the cunning of leaders, and the loyalty of men willing to risk all for their commanders. Despite the turbulence, his childhood was not without moments of stability and learning. The Zhao household was modest but cultivated. Zhao Kuangyin was taught the classics of Confucian thought, as was expected of any boy who might one day seek a place in the civil or military establishment. Yet, what distinguished him even then was his natural charisma. Family anecdotes that survive in later chronicles describe him as a spirited child with a keen mind and a fearless streak, often leading neighborhood games that echoed the military drills he watched his father command. The influence of his mother, Lady Du, is worth pausing upon. In traditional accounts, she is portrayed as wise, firm, and deeply committed to the Confucian values of filial piety and integrity. It was she who encouraged her son not only to learn the martial arts of horsemanship and archery, but also to respect learning, poetry, and the wisdom of the past. This combination of martial vigor and respect for scholarship would later be woven into the very fabric of the Song dynasty's identity. As Zhao Kuangyin grew, the lessons of instability pressed upon him. Each new dynasty that claimed the mandate of heaven brought with it promises of renewal, only to collapse within a handful of years. The young Zhao could see firsthand how the people suffered when rulers placed personal ambition above the welfare of the realm. Taxation grew heavy, military conscription pulled fathers from their families, and peasant households bore the weight of elite struggles. These impressions surely stayed with him, instilling both pragmatism and a desire for stability. By his teenage years, Zhao Kuangyin was already marked by a commanding presence. Accounts describe his tall stature, a firm voice, and an ability to inspire confidence in those around him. His father arranged for him to enter military service, a natural path in a time when the sword often decided the fate of rulers. Yet this was no ordinary enlistment. Zhao Kuangyin displayed tactical insight and a cool head under pressure, qualities that drew the notice of his superiors. In skirmishes along the northern frontiers, he showed both bravery and restraint, valuing discipline over reckless charges. The foundations of Taizu's character took shape in these formative years. Loyalty tempered by realism, a respect for both martial and civil traditions, and an instinct for leadership that seemed to come as much from his presence as from his deeds. His rise was not guaranteed. Many ambitious young men of that era sought power and vanished into obscurity. But his ability to balance firmness with fairness and courage with caution set him apart. We may imagine the young Zhao walking through the bustling streets of Luoyang, watching merchants unload silks and ceramics, hearing the debates of scholars at tea houses, and noticing the wary glances of common folk whenever rumors of warlords or shifting dynasties reached the city gates. The sensory world of his youth was one of contrasts, moments of cultural richness surrounded by the uncertainty of fractured rule. These experiences would later guide him as he envisioned a dynasty that sought stability not only for rulers, but also for the countless farmers, artisans, and traders whose lives formed the backbone of the empire. The presence of siblings also shaped him. Zhao Kuangyin grew up with brothers who would later play key roles in the dynasty's formation. His brother Zhao Kuangyi, for instance, would eventually succeed him as Emperor Taizong. Their bonds, forged in the household of their parents, were complex, marked by loyalty, but also by the tensions that inevitably accompany dynastic succession. For now, in his youth, they were simply companions in both study and martial training, sharpening each other's skills while absorbing the lessons of their family's military background. In reflecting on Zhao Kuangyin's early years, we see not only the seeds of an emperor, but also the textures of everyday life in 10th century China. Children grew up with bamboo toys and the rhythms of seasonal festivals. Families prepared meals of millet and rice, with fish or vegetables when fortune allowed. The sound of wooden clappers from watchmen punctuated the nights, while the morning air carried the smell of cooking fires. For Zhao, these sensory details were the backdrop to a childhood marked by both familial care and the shadows of national instability. By the time Zhao Kuangyin reached adulthood, he carried within him both the martial legacy of his father and the moral teachings of his mother. He was not of royal blood, yet destiny seemed to prepare him for a role greater than that of a loyal officer. The turbulence of the Five Dynasties period taught him that China needed not another fleeting dynasty, but a system capable of enduring. The boy who had once studied the classics by lamplight and learned to ride under the gaze of his father was already preparing, though unknowingly, to steady the course of history. As we drift from these early scenes, the image of the young Zhao Kuangyin remains vivid, a child of a military family shaped by both chaos and care, destined to transform the fractured world around him. In the next chapter, we will widen the lens, examining the larger canvas of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, so that we may understand more clearly the storm into which he was born and the fractured land he would one day unify. As we move forward into the wider world that surrounded Zhao Kuangyin's youth, we find ourselves in an era historians often describe as one of the most unstable and fragmented in China's long history. Known as the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms period, it lasted from the fall of the Tang Dynasty in 907 until the rise of the Song Dynasty in 960. In those 5 decades, the northern heartlands of China witnessed the rapid succession of 5 short-lived dynasties, later Liang, later Tang, later Jin, later Han, and later Zhou, while the south splintered into more than 10 regional kingdoms. The result was a patchwork of competing courts, shifting alliances, and a people caught in the middle of their rivalries. To imagine this world, one must set aside the image of the great unified Tang Empire that had preceded it. The Tang, at its height, had overseen a golden age of poetry, trade, and cosmopolitan culture, its capital of Chang'an renowned as one of the world's greatest cities. Yet by the late 9th century, rebellion and corruption had hollowed out its strength. The Huangqiao Rebellion in the 870s devastated much of the empire, leaving the land weakened and depopulated in many regions. When the dynasty finally collapsed, there was no single power strong enough to replace it. Instead, military governors known as jiedushi once appointed to protect the empire's borders, turned their armies inward, carving out territories for themselves. These warlords operated like kings in all but name, levying taxes, enforcing laws, and expanding their power through conquest or alliance. The legitimacy of rule during this time rested less on the Confucian ideals of harmony and more on sheer military strength. It was within this world that Zhao Kuangyin's family lived and served, caught between duty to their lords and the uncertainties of survival. The 5 dynasties were all based in the north, near the Yellow River Plain, the heartland of Chinese civilization. Yet their reigns were short and precarious. The later Liang, established by Zhu Wen in 907, held power for less than 2 decades before being overthrown. Each subsequent dynasty fell in turn, undone by internal strife or toppled by ambitious generals. The rapid turnover of rulers made it clear to observers, even at the time, that the mandate of heaven was fragile when grounded solely in military force. Meanwhile, the south was far more stable, though divided into kingdoms such as Wu, Southern Tang, Wu Yue, Min, Chu, and others. These states, while smaller, enjoyed relative peace compared to the turmoil of the north. They cultivated trade along rivers and coastlines, developing regional cultures that emphasized commerce and art. Yet they lacked the military strength to reunify China on their own. Thus, the stage was set for a leader from the north, one capable of balancing military might with administrative vision to restore unity. The daily life of common people during this fractured age was marked by uncertainty. Farmers in the northern plains often faced heavy taxation from competing warlords. Armies marched through their fields, seizing grain, conscripting young men, and leaving families to rebuild once battles moved elsewhere. Villages might find themselves under the control of one dynasty in a given year, only to wake the next under the authority of another. This constant flux bred weariness and a longing for stability. In the south, by contrast, communities along the Yangtze River or near coastal ports saw the growth of markets and local industries. Silk weaving, ceramics, and trade with neighboring regions flourished in certain pockets, showing that even in times of political chaos, economic life could adapt and endure. Religious and cultural life also shifted during these years. Buddhism, which had spread widely during the Tang, continued to serve as a source of solace and continuity. Temples offered not only spiritual refuge, but also practical aid, such as food distribution and literacy education. Taoism and Confucianism remained influential as well, though the Confucian order was strained by the collapse of central authority. Intellectuals debated the nature of legitimate rule, asking what qualities truly earned the mandate of heaven when dynasties could rise and fall so quickly. It was in this fractured environment that Zhao Kuangyin began his service. As a young man entering the military, he would have been keenly aware of the precariousness of dynasties and the importance of loyalty among soldiers. He witnessed firsthand how warlords seized power, often by force, and how quickly they could lose it. Such observations likely shaped his later resolve to create a dynasty not rooted merely in arms, but in strong institutions and civil governance. The final of the 5 dynasties, the later Zhou, emerged in 951 and offered a glimmer of stability. Under Emperor Shizong, the later Zhou implemented reforms that sought to strengthen central authority and reduce the dominance of warlords. It was in this context that Zhao Kuangyin began to distinguish himself as a talented and loyal general. His military successes, combined with his reputation for fairness, made him a trusted figure in the court. Yet, even under later Zhou, uncertainty lingered, for no dynasty in this era could claim the full confidence of heaven or the people. As we reflect upon this period of turmoil, we sense the weariness of a land divided. Imagine the sight of soldiers passing through mountain valleys, their armor glinting in the sun, while peasants look on from the fields, uncertain whether these troops bring protection or plunder. Picture merchants in southern towns tallying their ledgers, hopeful that tomorrow's market will not be disrupted by distant wars. Hear the chants of monks echoing through temple halls, offering prayers for peace in a time when stability seemed only a distant dream. It was into this world, unsettled and fractured, that Zhao Kuangyin rose, a world that longed for the steady hand of a leader who could restore unity. The turmoil of the 5 dynasties period was not merely the backdrop to his life. It was the crucible that shaped him. teaching him the fragility of power and the necessity of balance between military and civil authority. From this era of uncertainty would emerge the foundations of the Song dynasty and the vision of an emperor determined to restore order not just for a fleeting moment, but for centuries to come. As we drift into the next stage of Zhao Kuangyin's life, the young man who grew up in an age of turmoil now begins to step forward onto the stage of history as a rising general. His career was shaped within the framework of the later Zhou dynasty, the last of the 5 northern dynasties before the Song. It was here that Zhao Kuangyin's talent for leadership, discipline, and loyalty to both his soldiers and his state began to distinguish him from others of his time. The later Zhou emerged in 951, following the overthrow of the later Han. Its founding emperor, Guo Wei, was himself a military leader who understood the importance of discipline and reform. His successor, Emperor Shizong, carried forward the task of strengthening the dynasty's rule. This was the environment into which Zhao Kuangyin entered service, and his abilities soon found fertile ground. Unlike many generals who rose through familial connections or sheer ruthlessness, Zhao's ascent was rooted in a combination of martial skill, personal charisma, and the rare gift of inspiring trust. From an early stage in his career, Zhao Kuangyin was assigned to important campaigns. He fought along the northern frontiers, where the later Zhou faced threats from steppe peoples such as the Khitan Liao dynasty. These encounters were no small matter. The Liao controlled vast territories to the north and frequently tested the defenses of Chinese states with swift cavalry raids. For a commander like Zhao, the challenge was to maintain discipline among his men while adapting to an enemy known for speed and mobility. His successes in these campaigns did not go unnoticed. Chronicles describe him as a man of tall stature, strong bearing, and calm under pressure. He was not prone to rash decisions, a quality that set him apart in an age when reckless bravery often led to disaster. His ability to maintain order in the camp, to distribute supplies fairly, and to show genuine concern for his soldiers' welfare earned him deep loyalty. Men under his command came to believe not only in his tactical ability, but also in his fairness, a quality that would later prove crucial when destiny placed him before the mutiny at Chenqiao. What further distinguished Zhao was his willingness to temper military life with learning. In the evenings after campaigns, he was said to engage in discussions about strategy, governance, and even the Confucian classics. Such habits revealed his awareness that military power alone could not hold a state together. In the instability of the 5 dynasties, Zhao seemed to grasp intuitively that a balance of arms and administration was required if China were to be reunited. By the mid-950s, Zhao Kuangyin's reputation was firmly established. He was promoted to commanding positions and entrusted with greater responsibilities. He served under Chai Rong, Emperor Shizong of later Zhou, who valued Zhao's loyalty and reliability. The two men shared a vision for strengthening central authority and curbing the power of regional warlords, those same military governors whose ambitions had fragmented China for half a century. Under Shizong's reforms, the later Zhou began to resemble a dynasty capable of stability, and Zhao Kuangyin became one of its most promising generals. Yet the fragility of dynasties during this era could not be ignored. Even as Zhao rose, he would have been acutely aware of how quickly power could shift. The deaths of emperors often left child heirs, vulnerable to manipulation by powerful generals or ministers. In such transitions, armies often determined the fate of thrones. Zhao's career was advancing, but it was advancing within a system that constantly risked collapse. Let us pause here and imagine Zhao in his military camp. The smell of wood smoke lingers as soldiers prepare their evening meals. Horses, tethered nearby, stamp their hooves against the packed earth. Officers consult maps under flickering lamplight, tracing the lines of rivers and mountain passes. Amid these routines, Zhao Kuangyin walks among his men, speaking with them not as a distant commander, but as a leader who shares their hardships. The trust formed in such moments would one day prove more powerful than any written decree. During this time, Zhao also strengthened ties with fellow officers who would later play key roles in his rise. Networks of loyalty among commanders were crucial, for in an age when dynasties rose and fell by military force, personal relationships often carried as much weight as official appointments. Zhao's friendships were built not only on shared victories, but on a reputation for fairness and integrity. Men trusted that he would not betray them for personal gain, and in return, they gave him their loyalty. It was within the later Zhou's campaigns that Zhao Kuangyin also began to sharpen his understanding of larger political realities. He observed firsthand how fragile dynastic legitimacy could be when built solely on military force. While victories on the battlefield were essential, the lasting endurance of a dynasty required something more: the loyalty of the people, the support of scholars, and the careful management of resources. These lessons would later guide him when he chose to elevate civil officials above military generals in the early Song dynasty. The death of Emperor Shizong in 959, leaving a young child heir, marked a turning point. With the court vulnerable and the northern borders threatened once again, the later Zhou found itself on shaky ground. Zhao Kuangyin, now one of the dynasty's most trusted commanders, was called upon to lead the army against threats from the north. It was in this moment of crisis that destiny intervened, and Zhao's path to the throne began to unfold. As we close this chapter, we see Zhao Kuangyin not yet as an emperor, but as a general of promise. He has earned the respect of soldiers and rulers alike, built a reputation for fairness, and cultivated a vision that reaches beyond mere warfare. In the instability of the later Zhou, he stands as a figure of steadiness, his career rising on the strength of both arms and integrity. Soon, the loyalty he had inspired would culminate in an extraordinary moment at Chenqiao, Shamel, when soldiers placed the imperial robe upon his shoulders and urged him to seize the mandate of heaven. As we drift further along the unfolding path of Zhao Kuangyin's life, we arrive at one of the most decisive and legendary moments in Chinese history, the Chenqiao Mutiny of 960. It is here, on a cold winter morning, that the general became an emperor and the seeds of the Song dynasty were planted. This event is remembered not for bloody conflict or violent usurpation, but for its unusual character. A coronation born from the loyalty of soldiers, wary of endless instability, who turned to a single leader for deliverance. The setting was the later Zhou dynasty. Emperor Shizong had died in 959, leaving behind a child heir, Emperor Gong, who was only 7 years old. This placed the empire in a vulnerable state. The northern borders faced renewed threats from the Khitan Liao dynasty, and within the capital, Kaifeng, ministers and generals debated who should lead the defense of the state. Among them, Zhao Kuangyin was chosen to command the army, his reputation for fairness and calm leadership making him the natural choice. His assignment was simple in theory: to march north and secure the borders. Yet destiny intervened before he even reached the front lines. On the march, at a place known as Chenqiao, a remarkable event unfolded. The soldiers under Zhao's command, weary from decades of dynastic collapse and longing for stability, gathered in the early dawn hours. They voiced their desire for a leader strong enough to end the cycle of chaos. They saw that Zhao Kuangyin possessed both the military prowess and the moral character to unite the fractured empire. In a spontaneous act that has been recounted in chronicles with both awe and reverence, they dressed him in the imperial yellow robe, symbol of the mandate of heaven, and proclaimed him emperor. This was the Chenqiao Mutiny, though the term mutiny may mislead, for it was not the violent overthrow of a commander, but rather the enthusiastic acclamation of one. Zhao Kuangyin, taken by surprise, is said to have initially resisted, insisting on his loyalty to the later Zhao. But his soldiers pressed him, arguing that heaven itself demanded a new dynasty to bring order and peace. The symbolism of the yellow robe was unmistakable. Once worn, it declared him the son of heaven, and to refuse was to deny the will of both men and heaven alike. The tale, as preserved in official histories, is told with an almost theatrical air. Imagine the dawn mist rising from the frosted ground, the clatter of armor as soldiers gathered, and the hush that fell as the yellow garment was presented. The robe was draped over Zhao's shoulders, and the shouts of "Long live the Emperor" rang out, echoing across the cold fields. In that moment, the Song dynasty was born. What followed was equally remarkable. Zhao Kuangyin, now Emperor Taizu, did not seize Kaifeng with violence or purge the court with bloodshed. Instead, he entered the capital with dignity, presenting himself as the chosen ruler of heaven and the people. The child emperor and his family were treated with respect, spared the cruelty that often followed such transitions. This clemency set a tone for his reign, a ruler not eager for blood, but determined to establish stability through measured authority. The political implications of this moment were profound. For decades, generals had toppled dynasties through force, only to repeat the cycle of violence. Taizu's rise, though still rooted in military loyalty, offered something different, a promise of enduring order. By accepting the throne with restraint, by sparing the former imperial household, and by presenting himself as the restorer of harmony rather than the destroyer of a dynasty, he began to win the trust of both officials and common people. Yet, beneath the calm, the act carried risks. To take the throne through the acclamation of soldiers was to invite suspicion from those wary of military coups. Taizu was acutely aware of this danger. From the very beginning of his reign, he sought to distance his rule from the raw power of the sword. He moved swiftly to assert civil authority, ensuring that scholar officials would hold influence greater than generals. The Qianqiao Mutiny was, paradoxically, both the pinnacle of military loyalty and the beginning of a deliberate effort to restrain the military class. Let us pause to imagine the ordinary people who heard news of this event. In Kaifeng, merchants opening their stalls may have looked up in surprise when rumors reached them that a new emperor had taken the throne. In rural villages, farmers in the fields may have greeted the change with weary indifference, accustomed as they were to shifting dynasties. Yet slowly, as reports spread that Zhao Guangyin had not purged rivals, that he had promised stability and fairness, hope began to take root. Could this be the dynasty to end the chaos? Could this general-turned-emperor bring the peace that had eluded China for half a century? The Qianqiao Mutiny has been romanticized in later history, retold in dramas and painted in scrolls. Its significance lies not only in the drama of the robe placed upon Zhao's shoulders, but in what followed, the careful, measured steps of a ruler intent on building something lasting. By accepting the throne without violence, and by immediately turning towards civil reform, Taizu set the Song dynasty on a path distinct from the short-lived dynasties that had preceded it. Thus, from a cold morning on a military march, the Song dynasty began, not with conquest or bloodshed, but with loyalty, persuasion, and a vision of stability. Zhao Guangyin, now Emperor Taizu, carried upon his shoulders not only the yellow robe, but the heavy weight of expectation. To reunite the realm, to heal the wounds of division, and to craft a dynasty worthy of the mandate of heaven. As we close this chapter, we stand with him at the threshold of empire. The mutiny at Qianqiao was not an end but a beginning, a quiet yet decisive turning point in Chinese history. In the chapters to come, we will see how this new emperor built his dynasty, choosing Kaifeng as its heart, balancing civil and military power, and shaping the Song into a culture of refinement, stability, and learning that would endure for centuries. With the yellow robe settled firmly on his shoulders and the empire entrusted to his care, Emperor Taizu faced a task of immense gravity, building the foundations of his dynasty. One of the most significant decisions he made was the choice of a capital. For centuries, the heart of Chinese dynasties had shifted between Chang'an, Luoyang, and other centers of power. Taizu's choice was Kaifeng, a city already significant during the later Zhao, but one that would, under the Song, become the beating heart of an empire defined not by military conquest, but by civil governance and cultural flourishing. Kaifeng, located along the Yellow River Plain, was not as naturally defensible as Chang'an with its surrounding mountains, nor as historically venerable as Luoyang. Yet its position carried advantages of a different kind. It was strategically placed along major waterways, making it a hub for trade and communication. The Grand Canal connected Kaifeng to the wealth of the Yangtze River Delta, ensuring the flow of grain, textiles, and ceramics. By centering his dynasty here, Taizu signaled that the Song would rest not only on the strength of armies, but on the prosperity of commerce and the vitality of civil administration. The process of establishing Kaifeng as the Song capital involved both practical reorganization and symbolic gestures. The imperial palace was expanded and refitted, designed to house the bureaucracy that Taizu envisioned as the true backbone of his dynasty. Ministries of revenue, rights, justice, and war were arranged in a clear hierarchy, staffed increasingly by scholar officials selected through examinations. The palace itself, though less imposing than the sprawling grandeur of Chang'an, reflected the song's preference for efficiency over excess. It was a working capital, a place where administration was prioritized above ceremony. Yet Kaifeng was not merely an administrative center. It became a vibrant city alive with the rhythms of daily life. Markets thrived, with stalls offering silks, teas, lacquerware, and books. Artisans worked in narrow lanes, shaping clay into ceramics or carving wood into furniture. At night, lanterns illuminated tea houses and theaters, where storytellers recounted tales of loyalty and betrayal. Visitors often remarked upon the city's bustle, describing it as a place where the pulse of empire could be felt in the chatter of merchants, as much as in the edicts of ministers. Taizu's choice of Kaifeng reflected his broader vision for the Song dynasty. In contrast to earlier dynasties that had anchored their legitimacy in grand military displays or monumental projects, the Song emphasized governance, trade, and culture. Kaifeng was not a fortress capital, but a crossroads, symbolizing the dynasty's embrace of commerce and scholarship as foundations of stability. By rooting his dynasty here, Taizu tied the empire's fate to the lifeblood of its rivers and the prosperity of its markets. This shift carried profound consequences for the structure of Chinese society. Under Taizu's reign, the civil bureaucracy grew in both size and prestige. Scholar officials, selected through the rigorous imperial examination system, became the arbiters of administration. This system, based on mastery of Confucian classics, allowed men of talent, though usually from wealthy families with the means to pursue study, to rise through merit rather than birth alone. In Kaifeng, examination halls and academies flourished, nurturing a culture in which knowledge became the currency of power. The emphasis on civil governance also reshaped the military landscape. Taizu, wary of the fate of dynasties toppled by ambitious generals, moved deliberately to weaken the military's grip on politics. He introduced measures to rotate commanders frequently, preventing them from building independent bases of loyalty. Civil officials were given authority over supplies and administration, ensuring that armies remained firmly under imperial control. Kaifeng thus became a city where pens held greater sway than swords, a symbol of the Song's distinctive approach to power. Daily life in Kaifeng during Taizu's reign reflected both stability and growth. Farmers in the surrounding countryside brought their produce to city markets, while merchants carried goods along canals that connected the capital to distant provinces. Temples offered spaces for worship and reflection, blending Buddhist, Taoist, and Confucian traditions. Scholars gathered in courtyards to debate matters of philosophy and governance, their voices mingling with the sounds of artisans at work and the calls of vendors selling steamed buns or fragrant teas. Let us pause to picture a scene along Kaifeng's bustling main street. Shopfronts display scrolls of calligraphy, while a craftsman sets out porcelain bowls that gleam under the morning sun. Children dart between stalls, their laughter echoing through the narrow lanes. A scholar, brush in hand, recites passages from the Analects to a small group of students. Above it all rises the palace complex, where officials in flowing robes prepare their memorials for the emperor. It is a city alive, not with fear of armies, but with the hum of daily life and the promise of cultural flourishing. For Taizu, the establishment of Kaifeng was also a symbolic act of legitimacy. By choosing a capital that embodied both prosperity and accessibility, he presented himself as a ruler in touch with the needs of his people. He resisted the temptation to build colossal monuments or distant retreats, preferring instead to focus resources on strengthening administration and ensuring a steady flow of grain and taxes. The stability of the Song rested not on spectacle, but on systems, a choice that reflected both pragmatism and vision. As the Song capital, Kaifeng would continue to grow in size and significance long after Taizu's death, eventually becoming one of the largest cities in the world during the Northern Song period. But it was under Taizu that the foundations were laid, the palace built, the bureaucracy organized, and the city positioned as the beating heart of a dynasty. His choice of capital was not merely geographic. It was ideological, embodying the Song's distinctive commitment to civil governance, commerce, and culture as the path to stability. Thus, in choosing Kaifeng, Emperor Taizu gave physical form to his vision of a dynasty that would endure. Where earlier dynasties had risen and fallen on the strength of generals, Taizu rooted his rule in the steady rhythms of administration and the prosperity of trade. From this center, the Song dynasty would extend its influence across China, leaving a legacy not of fleeting conquests, but of enduring cultural refinement and governance. Having secured the throne and established Kaifeng as the new capital, Emperor Taizu turned to the heart of his vision for the Song dynasty. The deliberate transformation of China's governance from one dominated by military generals to one guided by civil officials and scholar administrators. He had risen to the throne by the loyalty of soldiers, yet he understood more clearly than most the dangers of leaving too much power in the hands of military men. The chaos of the Five Dynasties period, the mutinies, the short-lived reigns, all testified to the dangers of unchecked generals. Taizu's genius lay in his ability to recognize this pattern and to design a system that sought to break it. From the very beginning of his reign, Taizu worked to reduce the influence of the military in court politics. One of his earliest and most symbolic reforms was known in later tradition as the cup of wine release of military power. According to historical accounts, Taizu invited several of his most powerful generals to a banquet. There, after offering them wine, he spoke candidly of the burden of ruling, of the constant anxieties and dangers that came with power. Then, in a gesture both generous and pragmatic, he encouraged them to lay aside their commands, retire in comfort, and enjoy lives of peace rather than risk the suspicions that inevitably accompanied military authority. Many accepted, grateful for the opportunity to withdraw without disgrace, and thus potential rivals were transformed into loyal retirees. While this story has acquired a legendary quality, it captures the essence of Taizu's approach: persuasion rather than force, gradual restructuring rather than violent purges. By reshaping the relationship between the throne and the military, he set the foundation for a dynasty in which civil officials would hold the balance of power. Central to this transformation was the imperial examination system. Though it had existed in earlier dynasties, Taizu gave it unprecedented importance. Civil service examinations tested candidates on their mastery of Confucian classics, poetry, and essays that demonstrated both literary skill and moral reasoning. Successful candidates entered government service, rising through a hierarchy that valued education, diligence, and loyalty. By promoting this system, Taizu ensured that the governance of the empire rested not on hereditary privilege or military force, but on intellectual merit. The implications of this shift were profound. Scholar officials became the guardians of the dynasty, advising the emperor, drafting laws, and overseeing taxation and justice. The civil bureaucracy expanded, covering every province with networks of administrators who reported back to Kaifeng. This gave the dynasty both reach and resilience. While armies could be defeated, bureaucracies could adapt, and Taizu understood that the durability of his dynasty depended on this adaptability. Yet, for ordinary people, the effects of these reforms were not only administrative, but also cultural. The emphasis on scholarship filtered into daily life. Families with means invested in education for their sons, hoping to secure advancement through the examinations. Academies sprang up in towns and villages where aspiring scholars recited Confucian texts by lamplight. The prestige of learning rose higher than that of the sword, reshaping the values of society itself. Still, the military could not be entirely neglected, and Taizu approached it with careful balance. He reorganized the army to ensure that no single general controlled too many troops. Commanders were frequently rotated, and administrative oversight by civil officials kept them tethered to the throne. The result was a professional army that defended the borders but posed little threat to the stability of the dynasty. This careful rebalancing between civil and military authority distinguished the Song from the dynasties that had preceded it. Let us imagine a day within Kaifeng's palace as these reforms took shape. Civil officials in long robes gather in the audience hall, their memorials neatly written on bamboo slips or paper scrolls. They debate matters of taxation, irrigation, and law, their voices calm yet determined. Outside, in the courtyards, soldiers drill under the watchful eyes of officers who know their authority is limited, their loyalty to the emperor reinforced by frequent reassignment. The city hums with balance, pens and brushes shaping the empire as much as swords and spears. Taizu's reforms also extended to the symbols of power. Imperial ceremonies highlighted Confucian ideals of harmony and order, emphasizing the emperor as a moral exemplar rather than a warrior conqueror. By presenting himself as a ruler of wisdom and moderation, Taizu reinforced the cultural prestige of the civil model of governance. Even the arts flourished under his reign, for with scholars in power, poetry, calligraphy, and philosophy became honored pursuits, echoing through the very chambers where once military plots might have been hatched. The long-term effects of this reorientation were striking. The Song dynasty, though often militarily vulnerable to its northern neighbors, became renowned for its cultural achievements, economic innovation, and administrative sophistication. It was a dynasty that prized stability at home over conquest abroad, scholarship over warfare, and careful governance over fleeting military glory. Taizu's reforms laid the foundation for this identity, embedding in the DNA of the Song a preference for the brush over the sword. But reforms alone could not guarantee success. Taizu faced constant challenges in ensuring that his system held together, that generals didn't rebel, that officials did not grow corrupt, that borders were secure despite restrained military power. His balancing act required vigilance, patience, and the trust of his subjects. Yet, by the time of his death in 976, he had firmly established the principle that civil authority was to stand above military ambition, a principle that would define the dynasty for centuries to come. As we step back from this chapter, we can see the subtle brilliance of Taizu's vision. He transformed the very foundation of power in China, shifting it from the uncertainties of armies to the steadiness of scholarship and governance. In doing so, he gave the Song dynasty not only a beginning, but also a character, a dynasty of learning, of balance, of cultural flourishing. It was not the path of conquest, but it was a path of endurance, one that allowed the Song to become one of the most distinctive dynasties in China's long history. With the throne stabilized under Taizu and the civil bureaucracy firmly established, the Song dynasty began to shape not only its political institutions, but also the everyday lives of its people. To understand the true significance of Taizu's reign, we must step beyond the palace halls and the scholar's desk and wander into the fields, the workshops, and the markets. It is here, in the daily rhythms of society, that the legacy of stability and governance found its most vivid expression. Life in the countryside formed the foundation of the dynasty's prosperity. The majority of the population were farmers, cultivating rice, millet, and wheat on the fertile plains that stretched across northern and southern China. The Song period saw the wider adoption of new rice varieties, particularly champa rice, introduced from Southeast Asia, which matured quickly and allowed for multiple harvests in a single year. This innovation transformed rural life, giving peasants a greater surplus to trade and reducing the constant anxiety of famine. Imagine the sight of terraced fields shimmering with water, farmers bending beneath wide-brimmed hats as they planted seedlings, and the seasonal rhythm of festivals tied to the cycles of planting and harvest. The prosperity of agriculture supported the growth of towns and markets. Kaifeng, as the capital, was the most dazzling, but smaller cities across the empire bustled with activity. Song society embraced commerce with an energy that distinguished it from earlier dynasties. Markets overflowed with goods. Silks dyed in brilliant colors, ceramics glazed with lustrous finishes, paper scrolls filled with poetry and calligraphy. Merchants formed guilds, artisans specialized in crafts, and trade networks stretched across rivers, roads, and seas. For many, the market was as much a place of community as of exchange, where news, gossip, and ideas traveled as swiftly as goods. The use of paper money, first introduced in the Song period, marked a profound shift in daily economic life. Rather than carrying heavy copper coins, merchants and travelers could exchange notes backed by government authority. This innovation, one of the earliest examples of paper currency in world history, made trade more efficient and encouraged broader participation in the economy. Imagine a trader unrolling a carefully inked note, bearing seals of authenticity, to complete a transaction for bundles of silk or crates of tea, a small act that represented the sophistication of Song financial systems. Education and scholarship so central to Taizu's reforms, filtered down into daily life as well. Families with the means invested in tutors and schools for their sons, hoping for success in the imperial examinations. Even in rural areas, village schools emerged, where students practiced brush calligraphy on bamboo slips or rough paper. The prestige of the scholar official class created a culture in which learning was highly prized, shaping values that extended far beyond the walls of Kaifeng's examination halls. A boy reciting lines from the Confucian Analects in a small village classroom participated in the same culture that animated debates at the imperial court. Women's lives, too, were shaped by the currents of song society, though often within the constraints of Confucian ideals of family and hierarchy. While the emphasis on education primarily favored men, women contributed significantly to household economies, managing farms, weaving cloth, and engaging in local trade. In urban centers, some women became known for their poetry, painting, and calligraphy, their talents celebrated in elite circles. Within households, the Confucian ideal of filial piety structured daily life, emphasizing harmony among generations, respect for elders, and devotion to family duty. Religious practice formed another layer of daily existence. Buddhism remained widespread, with temples dotting the countryside and city neighborhoods alike. Monks offered spiritual guidance, organized charitable relief, and conducted rituals for the dead. Taoist practices continued as well, focusing on harmony with nature and longevity, while Confucianism guided social and political values. It was not unusual for families to engage in all three traditions, seeking blessings from Buddhist shrines, Taoist deities, and Confucian rituals in the same breath. The rhythm of temple bells, the scent of incense curling through courtyards, and the sight of monks in saffron or gray robes were familiar parts of life for ordinary people. The arts flourished in this environment of stability and prosperity. Song painting, with its emphasis on landscapes, reflected both philosophical ideas and everyday observations of nature. Scrolls depicted towering mountains, winding rivers, and small figures of scholars or fishermen, evoking a sense of harmony between humanity and the natural world. These paintings were not only expressions of aesthetic beauty, but also reflections of the intellectual life of the song, which prized contemplation, balance, and subtlety. Calligraphy, too, held great prestige, its flowing strokes seen as windows into the moral character of the writer. Entertainment and leisure enriched urban life. In Kaifeng, tea houses offered spaces for conversation, storytelling, and performance. Puppet shows, acrobatics, and operatic singing entertained crowds. Night markets glowed with lanterns, offering not only food and goods, but also a sense of vibrancy that marked song cities as lively centers of culture. Such scenes remind us that while emperors and officials shaped institutions, the life of the dynasty pulsed in the laughter of children chasing lanterns, the bargaining of merchants, and the music drifting from taverns. At the same time, the Song government worked to maintain order and fairness. Officials monitored weights and measures in markets, resolved disputes among merchants, and oversaw the distribution of grain. Taizu's emphasis on civil administration meant that the machinery of the state touched everyday life in tangible ways. Farmers, artisans, and merchants encountered the presence of the state, not only in taxation, but also in infrastructure projects, irrigation canals, roads, and flood defenses that supported their livelihoods. As we close this chapter, let us reflect on the balance that characterized early Song society under Taizu. It was a world where farmers harvested rice in fields glistening with water, where merchants traded goods with slips of paper rather than heavy coins, where scholars recited ancient texts in dimly lit classrooms, and where families honored their ancestors with incense and ritual bows. The dynasty's identity, shaped by Taizu's reforms, reached into every aspect of daily life, binding together the empire not only through laws and armies, but through shared values and practices. The Song dynasty's rise was thus not only a political transformation, but a social one, a reweaving of the threads of ordinary existence into a pattern marked by stability, learning, and cultural richness. In the next section, we will look outward from Kaifeng's walls and China's villages to consider the dynasty's foreign relations and the challenges it faced from powerful neighbors beyond its borders. No dynasty in China's long history could afford to live in isolation, and the early Song dynasty under Emperor Taizu was no exception. While Taizu worked diligently to strengthen internal stability, his realm was surrounded by neighbors whose power and ambitions could not be ignored. Chief among these were the Khitan Liao dynasty to the north, a formidable state founded by a semi-nomadic people whose cavalry posed a constant challenge to China's agrarian empire. To understand Taizu's reign fully, we must turn our attention to these external dynamics: how the Song managed foreign relations, how diplomacy became as important as military might, and how the northern threats shaped the character of the dynasty. The Liao dynasty, established by the Khitan people in 916, controlled a vast swath of territory stretching from Manchuria into what is now northern China. Their political system combined steppe traditions of tribal leadership with Chinese-style institutions, making them adaptable and resilient. They commanded swift horsemen, expert in raids and mobile warfare, tactics that repeatedly exposed the weaknesses of Chinese infantry-based armies. For the Song, the presence of such a powerful northern state was both a military danger and a political reality that had to be negotiated with care. Taizu understood the lessons of the Five Dynasties era, when reckless campaigns against northern states drained resources and destabilized fragile governments. He approached the Liao with caution, preferring diplomacy and compromise to open warfare. While he maintained military defenses along the northern frontier, he avoided the kind of large-scale campaigns that had so often doomed his predecessors. His strategy was pragmatic. The priority was to consolidate the new dynasty's power within China, not to overextend it in costly wars beyond its borders. This pragmatism gave rise to a pattern that would characterize much of the Song dynasty's foreign policy: the use of tribute and diplomacy to secure peace. The Song often agreed to pay the Liao in silver and silk, a practice that might appear humiliating from the perspective of military glory, but which in practice bought stability and freed resources for internal development. By accepting these arrangements, Taizu placed the security of his people above the pursuit of battlefield prestige, a decision that reflected his emphasis on stability over conquest. Beyond the Liao, other states also shaped Song foreign relations. To the southwest lay the Tangut people, who would later form the Western Xia dynasty. Though less threatening during Taizu's reign, their growing presence along the frontier foreshadowed future challenges. In the south, smaller kingdoms and tribal groups maintained intermittent contact with the Song, often through trade and tribute. To the east, across the seas, Japan was in its Heian period, more inwardly focused and less directly engaged with China, though trade continued. The Song's greatest diplomatic and military concern remained firmly fixed on the northern frontier. The reality of compromise with the Liao was not always easy for the Song court to accept. Scholar officials debated the ethics and implications of paying tribute, with some arguing that it undermined the dignity of the dynasty. Yet others recognized that the resources preserved by diplomacy enabled the empire to flourish in other ways: investment in infrastructure, education, and the arts. Taizu himself seems to have viewed these payments as a necessary price for peace, a pragmatic solution in a world where military confrontation promised only uncertainty. For the people living along the borders, the relationship with the Liao was not an abstract matter of diplomacy, but a daily reality. Villages near the frontier lived in a state of vigilance, wary of sudden raids. Soldiers stationed in outposts kept watch across windswept plains, their presence both a reassurance and a reminder of vulnerability. At the same time, trade flourished across the frontier, as Chinese goods such as silk and ceramics found eager buyers among the Khitan, while horses, furs, and other steppe products made their way south. These exchanges, formal and informal, bound the two states together even as tensions persisted. Let us pause to imagine such a scene at the frontier. A caravan approaches the border outpost, laden with bolts of silk. Officials check documents stamped with seals, verifying tribute payments or trade licenses. On the other side, Khitan traders lead sturdy horses, their saddles decorated with leather and iron. Despite the official hostility between the two states, individuals found ways to connect, to exchange, and to benefit from the flows of goods and culture that passed along the frontier zones. The Song's diplomatic strategy reflected not weakness, but a conscious reorientation of priorities. Where earlier dynasties had staked their legitimacy on martial dominance, the Song under Taizu staked its legitimacy on internal harmony and prosperity. By choosing negotiation over conquest, Taizu allowed the dynasty to focus its energies inward, fostering cultural achievements, economic innovations, and administrative reforms. This approach, however, came with long-term consequences. The Song would be remembered as a dynasty of great cultural brilliance, but persistent military vulnerability. Religious and cultural exchanges also flowed along these diplomatic channels. Buddhist monks traveled between China and the Liao, carrying texts, relics, and ideas. Artisans and craftsmen sometimes crossed borders, contributing to a shared cultural sphere that transcended political rivalry. Even as armies faced one another across the plains, the currents of religion, art, and commerce tied the two civilizations together in subtle ways. As Taizu's reign progressed, his policy of cautious diplomacy with the Liao and other neighbors created an environment in which the Song could consolidate its internal foundations. The threat of the north remained ever present, a shadow over the dynasty's security, but it did not overwhelm the Song's early years. Instead, the empire grew in confidence, rooted in the conviction that stability at home was worth the compromises required abroad. As we close this chapter, we stand at the northern frontier, gazing out across windswept grasslands where the horsemen of the Liao patrol. Behind us lies the cultivated land of the Song, fields of rice and wheat, villages and cities alive with commerce and learning. Between these two worlds lies a fragile balance, one sustained not by conquest but by diplomacy. Taizu's vision was clear. Better a dynasty of peace and prosperity within than a dynasty undone by reckless battles without. In the next section, we will reflect on the end of his reign, the question of succession, and the enduring legacy he left for the generations that followed. As the reign of Emperor Taizu reached its closing years, the vision that had guided his life and rule began to solidify into something greater than any single reign. A legacy that would shape the Song dynasty for centuries. From his rise at Chenqiao to his steady establishment of Kaifeng as the capital, from his emphasis on civil authority to his careful diplomacy with northern neighbors, Taizu laid the foundation for a dynasty defined by stability, scholarship, and cultural refinement. Yet, as with every emperor, the end of his reign brought questions of succession, of unfinished ambitions, and of how his choices would echo through generations. Taizu's rule, from 960 until his death in 976, was relatively brief when measured against the centuries that followed. But in those 16 years, he achieved what few before him had managed, the reunification of much of China after decades of fragmentation. Though the empire was not fully consolidated, the southern kingdoms, such as Wu Yue and southern Tang, still maintained semi-autonomous power. Taizu's steady campaigns and diplomacy brought them gradually under Song authority. By the time of his death, the dynasty stood on firm ground, its institutions established and its vision clear. Yet, even as he consolidated the empire, Taizu left unanswered questions about the nature of succession. Official histories record that his younger brother, Zhao Kuangyi, later Emperor Taizong, took the throne after Taizu's death. The circumstances of this transition have long invited speculation. Some later accounts suggest that Taizu may have intended his throne to pass to one of his sons, but that Taizong maneuvered to seize power upon his brother's death. Stories of whispered conversations, dimly lit chambers, and the so-called candlelight edict abound in later chronicles, though historians debate their accuracy. What is certain is that Taizong became the second emperor of Song, continuing many of Taizu's policies, but pursuing a more aggressive military stance. For Taizu himself, the final years of his reign were marked not by conquest, but by consolidation. He emphasized fairness in governance, encouraged the growth of schools and academies, and supported infrastructure projects such as irrigation canals and city walls. His goal was not to expand recklessly, but to ensure that the dynasty would endure beyond his lifetime. In this sense, his reign was as much about preparation for the future as it was about the present. The legacy he left was one of balance, the careful integration of civil and military authority, the strengthening of the examination system, and the prioritization of stability over glory. These principles defined the Song dynasty long after Taizu's passing. The civil bureaucracy became the dynasty's backbone. producing generations of scholar officials whose writings, policies, and philosophies enriched Chinese culture. The dynasty's emphasis on learning and refinement gave rise to advances in printing, literature, and art that would resonate far beyond its borders. For the ordinary people of the Song, Taizu's reign brought something even more precious: predictability. After decades of uncertainty during the Five Dynasties period, families could plant their fields without fear of sudden upheaval, merchants could travel roads that were relatively secure, and scholars could prepare for examinations knowing that a stable government would honor their achievements. In the quiet rhythms of village life, in the hum of city markets, in the measured debates of scholars, the legacy of Taizu's stability was felt most keenly. Still, challenges remained unresolved. The northern frontier with the Liao dynasty continued to pose difficulties, and the Song's reliance on diplomacy and tribute would, in later centuries, be criticized as a sign of weakness. The preference for civil authority, while fostering cultural brilliance, also left the military somewhat neglected, a vulnerability that future generations would exploit. Yet these limitations were part of the delicate balance Taizu sought to maintain. Too much emphasis on war risked the chaos of the past, while too little could invite dangers from beyond. His legacy was not perfection, but prudence. The memory of Taizu himself became intertwined with the identity of the Song. In temples and shrines, his image was venerated as the founder, the man who had ended chaos and restored order. His name was invoked in ceremonies, his deeds recounted in histories and poems. Generations of emperors looked back to him as a model of moderation, wisdom, and foresight. The Song's enduring emphasis on civil governance was, in many ways, a living monument to his reign. Let us linger for a moment in Kaifeng at the end of his life. The city is vibrant, its markets filled with goods, its streets alive with people of every station. In the palace, officials gather to present their memorials, while soldiers patrol quietly at the gates, symbols of security rather than dominance. Within his chambers, the aging emperor reflects on the path from soldier to sovereign, on the morning at Chenxiao when the yellow robe was placed upon him, and on the years spent steadying a fractured land. His reign has been one of building, not destruction, of cultivation, not conquest. When Taizu died in 976, the dynasty did not collapse, as so many before had done. Instead, it endured, strengthened by the institutions he had crafted. His brother's succession, though shadowed by rumor, did not plunge the realm into chaos. This continuity was itself a testament to Taizu's vision, a dynasty resilient enough to survive the death of its founder. In this, he succeeded where many had failed. The legacy of Emperor Taizu is thus twofold. On one level, it is the story of a man who rose from military officer to emperor, who seized a moment of destiny and transformed it into lasting stability. On another level, it is the story of a dynasty that embraced his vision, choosing the pen over the sword, the school over the battlefield, and stability over ambition. His reign was not without its limits, but it laid the foundation for centuries of cultural flourishing, economic growth, and intellectual achievement. As we close this final chapter, we reflect on the gentle yet steady current of Taizu's reign. It was not a reign of dazzling conquests or towering monuments, but one of quiet strength, enduring reforms, and profound influence. His story reminds us that true greatness in history is not always found in moments of glory, but in the patient work of building systems that endure. The Song dynasty, with its culture of learning, its refined art, its vibrant markets, and its resilient governance, was the lasting monument to his vision. And so, as the lanterns of Kaifeng flicker in the evening breeze, the spirit of Emperor Taizu lingers, a reminder that in the steady pursuit of stability, one man can shape the destiny of a civilization.